I always feel like there's this rush to the bottom of pricing and to compete. Okay, I'm going to lower $5. Okay, I'll lower 10. Cut your cleaning fee, roll in your cleaning fee. We don't have to do any of that on the Bloom House. Price Labs would say Bloom House should be like $130 a night, and we do 500 to 800 bucks a night.
Today, I'm super excited to be here with Chereen. She is the founder and CEO at Lodgewell.
When I started really being willing to explore a new path for Lodgewell, we literally have homes from $100 a night to $10,000 a night. I'm very much in the moment of 18 years in, but thinking about what would I do differently now? What pivots do I want to make? Slow it down, really tap into what do I want?
What happened? What triggered the realization there?
Now that I sit here 18 years later, grew the portfolio up to about 100 homes. I have this vision of 12 to 15 really incredible homes. If you have one-of-a-kind properties, you get to get out of the rat race. We're not about heads and beds. We're about faces and places.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality, and where we aim to interview and have conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, operators, investors, and founders in the short-term rental, real estate, and hospitality industries, so they can tell us about their stories, they can tell us about the lessons that they have learned along the way, as well as maybe some of the mistakes that they might have made as well, so we can learn about those mistakes and maybe not have to make those same mistakes ourselves. Today, I'm super excited to be here with Chereen. She is the founder and CEO at Lodgewell, and we're going to be talking about, everything hospitality, guest experience, how to build a property management company, how to scale it, how to also, offer events in those accommodations, and why events might be an interesting avenue and model for some people to consider, but also what are the challenges specific, to having that model of also incorporating events into the mix. We're going to talk about the importance of trust. We're going to talk about the power of community. We're going to talk about how, at the end of the day, being an entrepreneur is also a matter of having setbacks and doing your best to go through and figure things out. So yeah, overall, super excited to be here with you, Chereen. It's been a couple of years already that we've known each other, and so I'm delighted to have you on. Thanks so much for taking the time. Let's get started with right away understanding, if you had to start all over again in this industry, in this business, which you've been in for quite a few years already, and you could do something differently, what if anything would you do differently?
Passionate. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm super excited. And that's an awesome question because actually I'm very much in the moment, 18 years in, but thinking about what would I do differently now? What pivots do I want to make? So it's a very relevant question for me currently, and then hopefully for your listeners as well. What first comes to mind is slow it down. Like I started this a very long time ago. And it wasn't quite on a whim, but it was somewhat of a whim. I had a 4-year-old and a newborn, and I just wanted something different. I wanted to be able to get out of the house and do something fun. I had sold my catering event management company, and this just kind of started. And I really started with one condo without thinking too much, and then just it feels like almost just kept rolling for 17 years. And then COVID was a bit of a wake-up call, and then also just exiting a big building and a big account, in April of 23 allowed me to think about things, and so just being much more, like, slow it down, really tap into what do I want, because ultimately, this is, um it's my life, like, I think about it in the morning, the afternoon, the evenings, I dream about it while I sleep, and so what do I want? And I never really started there in the beginning. It was more what's out there, what can I copy, what are people doing, and kind of following the trends of what I was seeing versus really tapping into why am I doing this and what do I want? And so
Mhm.
that would be my just
Yeah.
take the time, slow it down, get clear. What do you want? Why are you doing this? for yourself before going out to the public.
And if I may, Chereen, just just to dig a little bit deeper there to understand what's the importance of doing that? What's the importance of slowing down and maybe asking yourself those questions, earlier on? Like, what's the impact of not doing that you're maybe realizing just now? And what do you think are some things you could have prevented by taking that time to reflect and slow down at first?
And actually, as you're saying that, I do think I achieved my aim at the moment by not slowing down because my aim was a little bit get out of the house, do something different. So I did achieve that. But again, it's so a part, at least for me, it's such a part of me and like the way that I live. And I love being in service of others. Like that really does light me up. I get immense amount of joy from hosting and supporting people and, joy, wow, and wonder is, part of our ethos and our company. And I also like this notion of give your overflow that's come to me recently. And so there's often the pour into others, but rather than tipping out and emptying, how about we give our overflow, like fill ourselves first? Kind of that airplane notion of put your mask on your face first before you help others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that slowing down like allows one to get clear and what they need to then give from their overflow. And then if you're giving from overflow versus deficiency or leaking or overwhelm or anything in that realm, I think you're just going to deliver a better product and you're going to live a better life.
And when it comes to slowing down and asking yourself those questions, what does that look like? So let's say the past Shireen is listening and is wanting to put in practice this advice. What does that mean? Does it mean not accepting every owner? Does it mean like not hiring too early on? Does it mean even questioning whether this is something you want to do in the first place before you start doing it? Like what would that mean?
It's all of those and more.
Mhm,
So first, it's like slowing down myself. Like I can't, well, I can. In the past, I would do a lot of creation and innovation. It feels now almost like on the fly, and it's
mm,
super invigorating for me. So it's like almost like an addiction. And then, but I now realize I would think things through 80% of the way. And then that last 20% can be really critical as to whether, go that path or not. So when you say like, do you take that home? Do you not take that home? Previously, I was like, hell yeah, we take that home, and we weren't getting like any really crappy homes, but in general, I just said yes. But I didn't vet the owner. I didn't vet, what's the market doing right now? Like, is this a good addition? Is it a bad addition? What would be needed to make it a really great addition, to
mhm,
our portfolio? It was more just like, yes, let's do it, because I was a little growth minded and, let's bring them all in and we'll make it work and we'll figure it out later. And that
mhm,
has some benefits and that has some pain points. And so now that I sit here 18 years later, grew the portfolio up to about 100 homes. We're currently at 43. And I have this vision of just 15 really incredible, 12 to 15 really incredible homes, and that would really fuel me and what I'm interested in doing, and those owners would be highly committed to the mission. The guest would have an incredible experience because it's gonna be so intentional and so thoughtful and so well designed and really in alignment for all 3 participants, which is Lodgewell, the guest, and the owner.
Yeah, that's super interesting, right? Because it also goes back to the concept of intentionality that you just brought up of like, you're doing something because it's aligned with the type of company you're trying to build, the type of person you are, what's needed out there as well. Because it's very different to go and build something with the mindset of let me scale this past hundreds of properties and I,
I
I want
wanted
to
to
go
go
for
into multiple
scalability.
cities all across the nation, go, 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 so it's
So
a
you
very
did
different mindset
so
now.
you did have that mindset. That's what led you to to scaling past 100 properties under management. What happened? What triggered the realization that like I might be better off having just 15, 20 exceptional properties rather than going for volume?
So there's many little steps along the way, but the one that I think triggered this, I didn't know I was pivoting at the time, but I think it's when it kicked off. It was actually during COVID. I didn't know, but I had created a collection, basically generically beautiful. I wanted our homes to be welcoming to everyone. And then COVID hit and nobody was going to homes, for a tiny bit. So there was time to think, which I had
Mhm.
not had time before that. And then kind of watching after the lockdown when people were really intentional about their travel, what did they pick? Where did they go? What did they gravitate towards? And we have this property in our portfolio called the Bloom House, which is a 1970s PhD project that's this melted dragon, unicorn, eggshell, seashell, crazy house that gets 9 million views on Airbnb, featured in Architectural Digest, just gets like it's really magical. And we had 12 vacant nights during COVID at $800 a night for a one bedroom. So I was like, "Oh, when travel really matters, people want intentionally specific." And so this is 95% of our guests are couples wanting to reconnect, to do something special, be magical for a moment, whether it's in a proposal or an anniversary or a birthday or just a special moment. And so then I was like, "Okay, that's where I need to go." Not
Mhm.
this broad, generically beautiful, make it for everybody, but intentionally specific for the moment.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then it's been a 3-year journey to really kinda get comfortable with, and you were talking a little bit, I actually my dry erase board's behind me. I treat this little picture, and it says permission slip. I give myself permission to pivot, because for a long time I thought, "But I've built all this." Like, that's so irresponsible to pivot, to
Mhm.
shift, to change. And I would kept trying to rearrange the puzzle pieces that I saw on the table of my existing business, but try to make it fit, for where I was at now. And it was quite the struggle. So there was a day probably in the last 6 months, I'm like, what if you just knocked all those puzzle pieces off the table and just started again? And that's
Mhm.
when I'm like, oh, I could have a collection of 12 or 15 properties that just were magical, brought me immense joy, happiness. We could deliver in spades on the hospitality, and that would be more impactful, more valuable than 100 generically beautiful.
Mhm. Mhm. And again, I think there's two ways to look at this in terms of there's probably many other ways to look at this, but in terms of like when someone is deciding what to do with their business, with their portfolio, property management wise, right? There's what is it that you're going to enjoy, right? That sort of the very personal decision of like what aligns best with you, and also there's the whole financial aspect of like, okay, you're in business, what makes more sense financially, right? And it's when you find that mix between the two, that space where the two intersect, that's when you're onto something. In your case, I'm curious because there's this concept of like, hospitality, unreasonable hospitality, going the extra mile, right? Like being very white glove, type mindset with the service. And one of the things you and I have discussed as well, and this relates to what we're discussing here as well, is how you had this idea, this vision of the kind of service you wanted to provide to your guests, the kind of experience you wanted to build. And I really like the term you just used here, intentionally specific experiences. But then you were realizing that it wasn't necessarily profitable to do that with all kinds of properties. So what was that
That was the
realization?
dilemma.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so a little bit for your listeners, like, our portfolio, and I'm still in a transition period, but when I started really being willing to explore, a new path for Lodgewell. We literally have homes from $100 a night to 10,000 a night. Like, that is the spread. And some of our $100 a night homes are some of my favorite owners. Like, they're just such awesome humans, and they're fun to be around, and so there was a part of me, it's like I can't give those up, because I love the owners so much. But those were the ones where our team was confused, like, okay, we do this type, like, say there's an issue inevitably, there's gonna be an issue in the home, and a guest is gonna be a place, AC goes
Mhm,
out, it's 100 degrees, and that can take several hours to resolve in a very from my perspective, in a very hospitable way. You could, of course, just cancel the reservation, say, "I'm so sorry," "We'll refund you and let you find another place." But that didn't show up as hospitable to me. But you can also spend 6, 7, 8 hours of a day trying to fix an AC, and a commission on a $100 night is 25 bucks. And so it's not profitable to deliver that level of hospitality on a $100 night stay. And so, but then we have other homes that may be 3, 4, or $5,000 a night, and you can certainly lean in. And so I had to make this choice that if I want to deliver the level of care and attention and personalization that I want that fills me up, like when I'm coming from my overflow space, I just
mhm,
have to be in these homes that can support that level of care, attention, service. And then I don't know what I'll do with the properties that are, the 100, 200, $300 a night. I don't know if they just go in a different portfolio. I don't know if I just navigate out of them. I don't know exactly yet where the future is for those, because again, I love those owners so much, and the
mhm,
guests are so awesome over there. And as the founder and leader of Lodgewell, I do need to have a profitable company to be able to stay in business and to be able
mm,
to, deliver on these, really incredible experiences that I know I enjoy, the travelers enjoy, and the owners get a lot of pride out of.
mhm, mhm. And I'm curious when it comes to sort of that ideal owner, right? That ideal owner, right? There's a couple of things that are interesting here. One is you work a lot of the properties you have are investment properties from discussions you and I have had. Now I'm curious and to hear your thoughts. Sometimes investor owners will just care about the numbers and they won't be that you know into the hospitality mindset, right? Sometimes, maybe not all the times, but for those investor owners that just look at the numbers, that don't have this feeling of wanting to create this incredible experience, how do you go about explaining to them or conveying to them the importance of this other side of what you do, and how that will translate into dollars and cents, as well. And the reason I'm asking is because you can have an owner of a very unique property that, because they just look at it as an investment, they don't they don't invest as it would be required in amenities, in decor, in different things that you might need to put in place and to go the extra mile. So what does that look like for you in terms of getting that message across to those owners?
So when I talk about my pivot and my shift, that is part of it, is being really clear with the owners. And you had even mentioned, like, what owners do you say yes to? What owners do you say no to? And now I'm very clear, like, we need to be in alignment. Like, I cannot have an owner that nickels and dimes things, because the whole premise falls apart if that's the mentality, that you're gonna save a dollar here, but sacrifice 1,000 over here. And I do believe that the experience is a package, like, it's not one thing, and so you can't separate it. And I truly believe, like, the perfect cup of coffee in the morning is just as important as the stunning real estate. And it's the weaving of all of that together that creates the opportunity for some really good ROI, which is what the investors are looking for. And some of my investors are looking, it's a long-term hold and they want to generate revenue off their property. Sometimes they're looking to build something up, to be able to sell. Like, one of our owners, purchase price was 600K and, it generates 150, 165,000 a year in rental revenue. What's the value of that property now if he wants to go sell it? It's definitely increased. And so there's a place for everyone, but if there is an owner that is not on board for generating exceptional experiences for the guests that are in their space and in their home, then we're just not going to be a good fit.
Mhm.
And so I don't try to convince them. They kind of need to already have that mindset, if that makes sense.
Okay, okay, interesting. And have you found that to be a mindset that is most shared precisely with this more unique, larger, higher end type properties?
Yeah, and actually, as you're saying that, it makes me think because so I'm focusing on properties that they're storied, they're unique, lean into art, architecture, and of the properties that we have in our portfolio, and as I want to add more to the portfolio that fit this category, the owners, it's a passion project for the owners. Like they have designed this, they love it, they're like intimate with it. They like every little choice was thought through and their story and their mission can't be separated from the property. And so
Mhm.
in that environment, I find it very easy to get them on board with the guest experience because they designed it to be shared from the very beginning. Like they all have this component of wanting, I mean, they're proud and they want people to know what they did and they want to share it and they like the accolades, they like the reviews. Like it's very gratifying for them.
Mhm.
So, yeah, if it was just a big beautiful box custom home, that could be a luxury property. It could probably perform really well financially. And I'm not looking to put that in my portfolio going forward.
Yeah. Okay. And that's interesting. And when it comes to this concept of this collection of very unique properties, 15, 20 very unique properties, there are some pros and there's some challenges, right? The pros are clear.
Yeah.
You're going to make more per property. You probably
They're one
will
of a
have
kind because
a
like
one of
on
a
all the
kind. Mhm.
OTAs and Airbnbs and Vrbo, like I always feel like there's this rush to the bottom of pricing and to compete and okay, I'm gonna lower $5. Okay, I'll lower 10, cut your cleaning fee, roll in your cleaning fee. And if you have one of a kind, like we don't have to do any of that on the Bloom House. Like a one like Price Labs would say Bloom House should be like 130 a night, and we do 500 to $800 a
Mhm.
night. And so I'm just trying to get if you have one of a kind properties, you get to get out of the rat race, or at least that's how it feels to me.
That's exactly it, right? So you are out of the rat race. You stand out. You almost have an edge, a hack, with regards to demand, right? Because you might even have your own additional sources of demand from the publications and the architectural prices and whatnot. What are some of the challenges from dealing with unique properties that someone listening might be thinking, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go and do unique properties, forget
Well,
volume, but I'm sure there's some challenges as well.
I mean, like, again, I'm not gonna stick solely on the Bloom House, but it was built in the '70s and, outside of Austin, not too code. You're tall, you're gonna hit your head, like when you're walking. There's things like Falling Leaves is another stunning property that we have in our portfolio, and it's a kind of glass house with hyperbolic roof but it's all glass. So you wanna sleep in past sunrise, it's a face mask. There's no curtains in the house, but that's by design and you're nestled in nature and it's stunningly beautiful, but you're using nature's clock, maybe not your own clock.
But on the management side, is there anything on the management side that you're like, it's really different to manage these properties, to handle these properties? Well, we talked about the pricing, the pricing, there's a
Yeah,
challenge in terms of.
pricing is always, like, a challenge in the beginning. We go with kind of we will run it just a traditional comp set, like on your 4-bedroom, 3-bed, whatever stats. So we'll run that. Then we'll have some just gut intuitive pricing, and then it's trial and error, like, in a way
Mhm,
that you don't have to do with a more standard property. Most of these are custom builds, so even, like, maintenance, like, there's special requirements to clean countertops, or the AC systems are not standard, or, we have one home with a glass ceiling over the pool, it's a indoor pool. Super cool when you're marketing and advertising, pain in the butt to manage a big humid body of water in the middle of a house, under a glass ceiling that magnifies 110 degrees outside in Austin in the summer. So they have these quirky, weird, getting our team trained up, like it's not a one size fits all protocol for any of these properties.
mhm, mhm.
And hence again why it's like, okay, well, let's do 12 to 15 really well versus trying to
Yes.
do 100 or more mediocre,
So, but you still think that despite the added challenges, the benefits outweighed the pros in terms of going with the unique inventory, the unique properties. I'm guessing revenue per property is significantly better. I'm
I
guessing
say
enjoyment.
1000%.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I say 1000% for myself, but that also goes back to my original, like, just really get clear on why you're doing what you want to do or what you're rolling out with your company. Because if somebody wants to, like, have a really standardized operations, and they wanna then go into 5, 10, 15, 20 cities, maybe this isn't the model. If
Mhm.
you want to be and nothing wrong with any of these models. Like, if you want it to be very passive in your company, you know, this is probably not your model. But if you really for me, I really enjoy the uniqueness. I've always liked things that are different every day. Like, that's just always been true. That's why I liked my catering event management company. Every event was different. And then I do believe that stays and the gatherings at our homes are events. Like, there's a start, middle, and end. And like, I really like that cadence, start, middle, end, start, middle, end, start, middle, end. But that is almost like you're beginning again all the time. And so for somebody that wants to just kinda, like, set it and let it run, this is not gonna be a model.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And in terms of that end, beginning, middle, and end mindset of like hosting someone is as if you were organizing an event. You're pretty unique about the way you view this process, and you have very specific brand standards and brand voice, and you even go to the extreme of like saying, you don't call yourself a property management company. Tell me a little bit more about what goes into that mindset of you saying, okay, I'm not just a property management company, and how does that event catering background help build this in terms of the mindset, but also in terms of putting it in practice? Like, what does that look like when you're trying to build this event like experience for a guest when you're seeing what the operation actually looks like?
Yeah, so to kinda start with how we set up, so you are correct. I do not call myself a property Lodgewell is not a property management company. Our owners are highly connected to their properties, and they take immense care in making sure that they're well-maintained and that they meet Lodgewell brand standards. We The homes that are in our portfolio, I guess I should start there too. There's 3 ways that homes are in our portfolio, and one, I own them, so a fair number, probably a dozen of the properties in our portfolio I own. I am a real estate investor myself, and so that's why ROI does matter to me as well. And then sometimes I will lease, so a little bit like that arbitrage model, but I end up doing kinda 3 to 10-year leases on a property, and I want sheetrock in. So, like, if I need to do renovations or improvements, and then I have the runway of time to cash flow those improvements. And then the third way is we partner with owners. So we don't do property management agreement, we do a partnership agreement. We don't do a commission, we do a revenue split. Um, and so we just kind of operate differently than some of those other more traditional property management would be the most appropriate word that most people would use. And then Lodgewell was designed to be a hospitality brand. So you mentioned we do have brand standards, we have a brand voice, we have an ethos that we operate, within and under. We have promises. We're not about heads and beds, we're about faces and places. And so that I think helps guide everything. And then even after our initial talk and this talk, I was like, honestly, we're a community, which you kind of referenced in the beginning. It's a collaboration. It's truly a collaboration between Lodgewell, the owners, and the guest. And everybody is working together. All of us are actually hosts. We're hosting guests at Lodgewell. The owners are hosting guests in there. And then the people who are booking with us are generally hosting people for a special occasion.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
that's an interesting perspective because, a lot of the traditional property management companies, the pitch to the owner is we'll take care of everything. You won't have to do anything. But yet, it's kind of like in practice, it is true that you do need the owner's approval, for
right,
precisely if
it's
you
their
want to go
home.
the extra mile. It's their home. Things will need to be kept up to date. So it's almost like, in theory, it sounds good to say you're gonna be completely out of the equation. There's nothing you're gonna have to do other than receive your money, in theory. But in practice, there are things the owner needs to be involved in. So if the expectation that was set was, oh, there's nothing for you to do, then every time the property manager comes with a question, with a suggestion, with something else that could be done, they're going to be like, why are you bothering me with this? I thought you were going to
Right,
take
it
care of
seems
it.
yeah, it seems like you're not honoring your promise because you said,
Right.
"We're gonna take care of it for you," but yet you're coming and that's why I wanted to be a little bit different too. Like, a lot of our clients and partners have come homeowners, partners, have come because they were with other companies, and they did feel like there was this promise, like, "Oh, we're gonna take care of everything," and there was also this they also felt like they then nickeled and dimed on the other side, so they'd had to pay for every roll of toilet paper, or if they went to check on a light bulb, they got a bill, and so they just didn't understand take care of everything meant this never-ending list of charges, and without their knowledge or being contacted or, and then they would get their statement. So most of our owners do appreciate kind of the boutique level. So we're not divorced from the property management because, again, to deliver a good hospitality experience, the property has to be in prime condition, and we are the eyes primarily in the home before the guest arrival, during the cleanings, during the inspections, during the deep cleans, all of those things. So, and a toilet goes out or AC example again, something happens during a stay, we are going to be the one that's the point person first and foremost to make that kinda happen. But the owners are the ones that are there to support the just general day in, day out, the lawn care, I always say, like, if there's a hailstorm, we're not getting on your roof to check, we'll tell you there was a storm, and then, you'll need to get somebody out to check your roof. And then we can do the white glove, everything all inclusive, for some owners. And some prefer that, and we're fine with that, and we can do that. And I find the best owners for this hospitality mission are often still involved, because when you say we need new landscaping in this area, or let's create this feature over here, if they're still really involved and connected and, part of the story of their home, we have a little bit better engagement when we make those requests.
Got it. And out of curiosity here, when you say, for example, we don't sign a management contract, we sign a partnership agreement. We don't do heads in beds. We do phases in places. We don't do a commission, we do a revenue split. Are these things that are sort of like just in the way that they're set, just psychologically just want to use this terminology because it conveys the message that you have this different intentionality in how you do things? Or are there actual like significant differences in some of the specifics of, let's say, your contract or the way you charge your fee versus the traditional property management model?
I think it's both, so I do think a property management agreement is different than a partnership agreement, like, legally, they're just different, one is more like a property management agreement is a little bit more like like you're a vendor for the owner, and a partnership agreement is 2 people coming together or 2 entities coming together or more to partner on the operations and the way things are managed and done. Then commission versus revenue share, those I do think are different, but they blend a little bit more into, like, tomato, tomato for me
Hmm.
on that
Hmm.
one. But I do think being clear and detailing what this means to Lodgewell, like, we actually define the terms in our agreement. Like, this is what this means. This is what this means. This is what this means, just to make sure there's no misunderstanding, and so I think that's important and for everybody to be clear and who does what when, and no right or wrong way, but it's just the alignment's more important to me. If anybody gets surprised, that's where I think the difficulties come, you know? And it's always a learning curve, like I will think I'm super clear and then some new question will come up and I'm like, "Oh, okay. I thought everybody thought the same way I did, and I didn't need to define that." Um So, yeah. But I just think it's a beautiful way to work with people, to really go into partnership.
Plus, it's almost like it's your business, it's your environment, it's your ecosystem, it's your little world. It's fun to have the opportunity to set your own language, to set your own tone, to set, like, I remember with talking with one of your team members, Tabitha, on how as well you guys go about the communication with the guests, as in, like, you're not going to say no to something. You're going to say, you know this is
We're
this is not.
solutions
Yeah,
driven,
solutions
so
driven. Yes, that's
yeah,
that's the.
you know, so, I mean, we don't say yes to everything, because sometimes like, one example that came up recently, a guest asked if there was a pool at a particular home, and instead of going, "No, there's no pool," we would say, this home does not have a pool, and here are the local swimming holes nearby. Here are the hotels that offer day passes. And oh, by the way, have you heard of this really cool company called Swimply that you can
Mhm.
actually rent a pool for a day, just like you've rented our home for, the week. And so it's
Exactly.
more
So
just like
instead of just saying
solutions
no,
oriented.
period, like,
Right.
yeah, you accomplished the objective of, like, there was an exchange of, there was a question, there was an answer. But here you're really looking at, okay, even if we don't have this, how do I still solve your need, or at least point you in the right direction? And that can really make the difference, right? In terms of
Yeah,
what
because
the.
obviously I'm not gonna put a pool in. Like, I'm not gonna
Of
build them a
course,
pool,
of course.
and if you went and put a $20, like, Walmart pool, that's not gonna service but we do have beautiful, like, Barton Springs is famous, Deep Eddy, like, these natural spring pools in
Mhm.
Austin, to the hotels have incredible cabanas and bars and experiences on rooftops, and so it can be additive, and I don't see that as, like, even sending somebody to Swimply, like, you can't with Swimply, you can only rent the exterior, not getting access. So none of these are like they're additive. I don't see them as competitive or taking away or, oh, I sent them away from our home. And I think that's important too. Like I think there's just enough for everybody. So I don't feel this need to just like keep everything really tight and oh, we don't leave our home or we do everything here.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Um, I want to touch on the real estate journey as well of yours. So you mentioned how a dozen or so of the properties in the portfolio are personally owned. what does that journey look like? How did you get into real estate, and what's been the process of growing that personal investment portfolio as well throughout the years?
Yeah, so I've loved real estate all my life. I remember as a child, just 6, 7, 8 years old, like, sketching houses, and this is what my house will look like, and my brother would design his, sitting beside me, and, so that's always been fun. I've always, even from a young age, it was more back in the day, I was gonna have a bed and breakfast. I don't even know if those actually even exist anymore, but, so it's always just been in me, and so then the first purchase was just, personal home, like, we had to live somewhere, and so I was able to purchase that, and I think we did a really good job on getting a good deal, and then did some renovations on that, and then, we lived there for 4 or 5 years, so it wasn't like a flip, but, that gave us some seed money to then buy, a bigger personal home, and then so that was kind of the first foray into real estate. Then with the short-term rentals HomeAway, which is now Verbo, had this program called Community Champions, and they had 14 of us across the US. And the thought was that if somebody was interested in renting their home, that they might like to talk to an individual than a salesperson at HomeAway. And so I was one of those 14 for a year. And so I met people through that and put some properties in my we were Top Trip Rentals at the time, but at that portfolio. But through doing all that, then my husband was able to see how real estate could generate revenue in this back in the day, it was, like, new, like, renting homes for vacations has been around for centuries, but this kinda notion of the Vrbo, the Airbnb, and, more widespread, it took the internet for that to become more common. So then we purchased a home on Lake LBJ, so we were able to get a personal vacation home. So that was kind of a dream of both of ours, and so and that has done well in revenue. Doesn't cover all the costs, but we're okay with that. And then we're just covering kind of the equity payments, and so we'll get all that back, and it's appreciated. I don't know, we bought for 500 and it's 1.8 now, so it's had, some good equity gain there. And then by seeing that, and then my company growing as well and getting more streamlined with the management, then I was able to purchase some just specifically for short-term rentals,
Mm.
not to I mean, we can use them personally because we own them, but that wasn't the aim of the purchase. It was for cash flow and for equity gain and to increase my portfolio. I do like when I own the property, I perceive myself to have more control over the experience, or at least the conversations are shorter. It's just between my ears.
Mhm.
Um, and then I also, a side note, like to, not currently doing this, but like to renovate and flip houses. And I also got stuck in a couple down markets where we couldn't sell, and the short-term rentals were a saving grace to carry me through to, the next cycle in real estate where the pricing picked back up.
Mhm, mhm. And of course, like, you know, part of that growth in some cases was selling the property to
Oh,
accumulate,
that's how I've rolled it all forward. Yes.
Okay. Has
Yeah.
has there also been like cases where you refinance, and then with the
Mhm.
refinancing
We've
you
done
you
yeah, we've
also
done the where
buy the next?
so our fix and flips, we were trying to do more like just turn those quick, which is the name of the game on that. But then when we would hold some for the short-term rentals, we would go ahead and do a cash refi so that we could pull and then I could go do the next project, because I didn't want that one property to then hold me up from doing something in the future. And we would cash out to the level that the short-term rental income could afford. 'Cause we also weren't looking to, have an expense every month to keep the property, and so finding that balance, is helpful, for th again, for my mission, for my aim, for my goals, you know?
Interesting. You mean the short rental income of the property you're refinancing, or the new property? You're looking at the new
Uh,
property covering the debt that you're
well
using on the
well,
first
both, but,
one.
when I'm talking about this, it's the cash out, because you 'cause you're then gonna have a higher
Then
mortgage
yeah,
payment
yeah,
when you take
exactly,
cash out.
exactly.
Yeah,
So you
and so
wanna
I just
like,
wanna make sure
and the reason I'm
income.
asking here is because I'm always intrigued by this cash flow management piece of growing an investment portfolio through cash out refinancing? Because it sounds so good in theory. You increase the value, you refinance, you buy the next. But then it's like, to your point, now now you have a bigger debt service to cover on the property you just refinance. And of course it changes from investor to investor, but your view of it is you need to make sure that the the initial property, the one you're refinancing, needs to be able to cover that extra debt. Or do you look at the new property, the revenues, the future potential revenues of this new property you're refinancing to acquire, that needs to help cover this debt? And I know it's probably just a
I don't
insignificant
usually do it like
detail.
that. I don't usually have the future property help cover the past. Other people might
Okay.
use that model, that's just not something I do. But I also another consideration that maybe some people do, some people don't, some investors won't look at equity gain at all, because it's an unknown and it's a value at the time of sale. But I consider it kind of like a stock, like you don't know the value of a stock until the day you go to sell it. That's the value that matters to you. And so there could be, so like example, one of our flip properties that we got stuck on and just couldn't sell. We were trying to sell it, I think at like 425 425,000, and we couldn't sell it, and then Austin was getting weird about short-term rental licenses, so it's like, "Let's get a license just in case they ban them," which was great timing, which we did, and so then we ended up and I think we were about 280 into the property, and then we were doing about 75,000 a year in rent income, so it was good, and it, kinda carried it, and we did a cash out to get our money out of that, and then we ended up selling it for 740, I think. So even if we had put $1,000 a month, like maybe we did have to just run it as an expense, but that's $12,000 a year. And I think we held it for 3 years. So that was 36,000, but we made by getting to the next cycle in the market because we sold it during that COVID hype. Um, but we made 300,000. So sure, I'll dump 36,000 into carrying cost to get me, the $300,000 exit profit,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just kind of again, what's your aim? What's your goal? What's your mission? Do you have the $1,000 a month to put in? Can you make it break even? So there's no right or wrong way to do it. And I love real estate for its ability to leverage. And I don't wanna get over leveraged, because
Hmm.
markets do shift, you know?
And
Like,
that is
nobody would have
yeah.
predicted like, I didn't really love owning a lot of real estate and having a lot of leases in May of 2020. It was a really freaking rough moment,
Hmm.
and then I wished I had only had a portfolio that was a revenue share.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so let's touch a little bit on this of leverage being such a powerful force, but one that you got to be careful with as well, because yeah, I mean, leverage is one of the most powerful forces in real estate. There's no other asset class where you can get so much debt, to
Right,
buy an
and
asset.
you get the gain on the top line, but you only pay percentage. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So it's really massive. Plus, in the US, you have, I think this is still in place. I know the 1031 exchanges. If you want to sell and buy something else, so there's so many things there. But to your point, it is easy to over leverage yourself when you have the ability to buy debt with debt on top of that, and then more and more and more in debt. And
Right,
then
right, right.
like, how do you personally define what too much leverage means? And you just gave an example now in the case of refinancing a property, which is super interesting to know. Like, you're not looking at the new property, having to pay
Yeah.
the original refinance. You're looking at the original property having to cover its own debt. That is helpful. Are there other tips like this, or in other contexts, where you look at, is this too much leverage, is this enough leverage?
Mhm.
How do you approach that thinking?
It's not so my husband would probably say I'm not conservative, but I do think I'm relatively conservative. So a couple different things. So one, I don't have a formula that I look at per se, but I do like to have 3 exit options on a property. Like, if I go into something and or not exits, but opportunities, I guess, would be the better word. Like, I could sell it, which could be an exit, so make sure that I'm not, kinda watch the market. I don't like to buy at the height of the market. I love to buy at the bottom of the market, but you never quite know where that is, so you're
Hmm.
usually buying a little bit on the upswing, but kinda I think you make your money on the purchase, but so selling it is where I wanna make some money. Also, can I long-term lease it? Can I short-term lease it? Could I do cash out, if I needed to, and the cash out could even help just save the property, for that $36,000 needed to get me to the 3 years later when I can exit. So I kinda look at, just multiple scenarios. I don't wanna have just one because I don't trust myself to get that one just right. So there's that. We're fortunate enough to have personal like, we're in a pretty good cash position personally, and so that gives some security, like, if something were to go just really bad, we could probably, in most cases, bail. I probably wouldn't wanna leverage out to where, we couldn't navigate it personally in some way or another to get to a better position. Because I know I had friends that got really messed up in the 2008 housing bubble crisis, and that was hard, and it bankrupt people and, they lost houses and homes and projects and I don't wanna be there.
Can this concept of a worst case, I want to be able to rent this as a long-term rental and still service my debt, does this apply in the unique property category? And the reason I'm asking is because I've
Yeah,
yeah, I've had
that's
people
a
on
good
in the past
question.
where they're like, look, you either are all in into this short-term rental hospitality thing, and for some people that means, if you're going to buy something that really generates good income short-term rental wise, well, it might not be in a urban center, it might be further out, it might be in a place where you're paying what you're paying because of the touristic potential that this place has. But if you were to run the numbers long term, you know the place doesn't, the numbers don't add up. So this investment side of things, how does it relate to the buying unique properties and having long-term rental as an exit strategy?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so a couple different things. So one, I am in a pivot. So good question because I don't know that I've slowed down enough to fully think that through. So that's a good one to kind of dive in deeper, and like what's my intention, what's my aim, what's my goal, what would happen. But to date, my actual purchases have been a little bit more traditional and not swinging so far to, like, one of a kind, but being unique still, so that is something good to think about. Austin at large, I do tend to when I'm purchasing, I rather purchase in a known, well-performing like Central Austin, even though it's gonna be more expensive, I just feel safer versus going to, like, a more unknown or further out, and again, if I'm going to buy in, like, my lake house, let's give that example, it's, an hour and a half out of town, but it's a known lake, it's a constant level lake, it's, it's been a vacation destination and residential area for decades and decades and decades. There's only so much waterfront. They can't make any more waterfront. And we looked at other lakes that were closer, because we're like, oh, if we were just 45 minutes away, maybe we go more. But Lake Travis is, you could have some years you have no water, and then you could have some years where the water is like right at your doorstep after a flood. And so we're like, that's too risky to have the water, you know, sometimes we have a lake house, sometimes we don't. So I think it's again, it just goes back to the purchase, like be really intentional in the purchase and think through because that's where if you overpay in the beginning, I find it very difficult to make it up
Hmm.
later. And so I am going to think about your question more like in future purchases, if I go into these highly unique, one of a kind properties within my own real estate portfolio, long-term leasing may need to be something that's
Mhm,
moved off the table,
mhm.
like,
Yeah, and
you
then you're
know.
going all in on the bet of, just the short-term rental side, and
Yeah.
which does. Mhm.
And or equity, because you could I also use flip, like, could I make enough improvements to, like, then just
Right, but again, like
circle
a
around and sell
unique
it,
property,
you
you
know?
don't have the same volume of comparables to also justify the sell. So it's interesting because yeah,
Yeah, and I own a historic home 2 blocks off of South Congress, which is a popular area, and I would consider selling that one right now because I have some other projects I would like to do. But not everybody wants an 1880s, stone
yeah,
killer location, but the layout is not, like the current modern homes and the way modern
exactly.
people live. So it will take a unique buyer,
Exactly, and when you're
to
looking at a
want that
flip, you probably
property.
want, to be able to, move it fast rather than, like, have to wait for the unique buyer to come by. So it's interesting, right? It's interesting. And what are you seeing currently as a real estate investor when you look at the market, when you look at, what's available? Like, I'm not in Austin, right? But I've seen sort of a lot of, videos and some people talking about, like, well, first of all, a lot of inventory, right, that has been built, and that's even led to, on the long-term rental side of things, for the first time in a long time, like, rents and purchase prices are going down.
Or going
So
down. Yeah.
is it a good time to be looking at buying in Austin, or there's too much uncertainty?
Okay, so Austin,
Yeah.
yeah, we have our, like, ethos and personality and way of being here. Okay, so it is a very flat market right now, so a lot of the things that you've talked about are true, and th I think what is impacting Austin the most right now is there doesn't seem to be urgency in the market for the sellers or the buyers right now. So from my perspective, it's created this weird I am doing what I hate other people doing. I'm like, "What's the harm in waiting and seeing?" And I'm like, "Well, nothing moves, nothing happens," like with because I'm seeking some investors in a project that I'm doing, and they're all kinda like, "Well, let's wait and see." I'm like, "But
Mhm.
no, I wanna do it now." But the sellers, they aren't willing to fire sell, and I think the buyers keep thinking as the inventory builds up, they'll get these killer deals. But Austin has never, or at least the 30 years I've been in real estate in Austin, the Austin market never really goes to that being the norm of just like fire sale, killer deals. There's still enough people moving in. There's still enough excitement about the city to date. That could change. And so people will get like a little discount, but it's a one-off if you find that really killer, incredible deal, and so I just feel like there's this stagnation in the
Mhm.
market right now, which I don't really
Mhm.
like, but I don't know what's gonna shift. I think people are also curious about interest rates. Will they come down? Trump, shifting things with tariffs and Doge and all those different things. People are kinda waiting for the dust to settle and
Mhm.
then see
Yeah, no,
what's
it's
what.
interesting. And are you personally looking at buying currently? Are you personally looking at?
I'm not actively seeking to purchase, I'm
Right,
never
right, right.
not
Yeah,
looking,
yeah, yeah.
if that makes sense. I did see a $37 million property, that's awesome, the other day, and I'm like, "I don't have $37 million," and that would not cash flow,
Right,
but
right,
it's
right.
beautiful,
You're looking at
you
it
know?
so that, once the 37 millions are there.
It's 7 homes on the Blanco River, it's got a 3,300 foot landing strip, a hangar, I mean, tennis courts, pool,
Mhm, mhm.
beautiful. But I'm like,
Shireen,
no
there's
business
one.
doing
Yeah.
that. But I would partner with
Yeah,
the
no,
owner on
for
that one.
sure. I
Like, that
mean,
would be an
definitely. I
awesome
mean, that
agreement.
if you're listening to this and you're the one who owns this 32 million, 37 million, probably not listening to this, but
Talk to
talk to
me. I would
Shireen.
love to
Yeah.
work with
One, one,
you.
one last thing, Shireen, I want to discuss with you before I let you go. This has been super fun, super insightful.
Uh-huh.
Events, right? The role that events play in your business. So tell us a little bit about how you juggle events and gatherings versus accommodations into this whole mix.
Yeah. So that that is a combination of just the me of me. I had the event catering company for a decade. I've had this hospitality company for 18 years. And I also am at a position where my kids are now both in college, so we're empty nesters now. And so events are just intriguing to me again because I have a little bit more freedom of time and space and I just love a good house party. I think there's something really intimate, special about welcoming your guest into a home. It's different than a restaurant, it's different than a bar, it's different than a hotel space, different than just a venue. And so there's something I really like about that. And when we can support our guests in doing that, and all of our homes have a stay, like the Bloom House can, 4 people can stay, but 8 people can gather. So that'd be a small dinner party. And then we have other homes like Falling Leaves where 10 people can stay, but 150 people can gather. We're outside the city limits. So there are some different things you have to think about, like rules and regulations and code, like being an event venue is different than, and we're not a venue, but it's different than just overnight stays. So like Austin, you can do gatherings of 49 people or less. So you do need to know some things, before you start opening up your homes. Like Airbnb doesn't allow you to advertise gatherings or events or parties on their site. So we have to use other avenues. So we also, in addition to the, traditional events, we also do photo shoots, film shoots, board meetings, offsite meetings, corporate events, things of that nature. And we'll use sites like Pure Space, Gigster, Tag Venue. Like there's a lot of online platforms to help you promote your properties for these
Mhm.
types of use
And would
as
you say,
well.
because of course there's an element of this, as a passion project, that's something that's really you specific, given your background, given what you enjoy. But of course, there's also like the revenue potential of like utilizing nights that would have gone sold, or just even like without having to have people stay over, just having monetizing that. In terms of the revenue piece, like, do you think this is the type of thing that, of course, I'm assuming this is mostly for those unique properties, but that really makes the difference in terms of the return on investment for those
Yeah,
unique properties, or is more about the enjoyment of it as well?
it's both, but it is work too. Like it's additional operational
Yeah.
lift, to get properties ready for events and gatherings. So, but for example, like something like Falling Leaves, like an overnight stay might be 2,500 a night, but a wedding could be 15,000. So it's a significant difference. And then but that's a home that's set up to do events. We can host 150 people there, and it was designed specifically for stays and gatherings. Hmm. I also like you kind of referenced some days that would not be used. So like corporate events, they would be a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, like see and they I also like these photo shoots, parties, gatherings. They have a budget typically. So you're not, I don't know, they have more to spend and it's like a line item. And so you're not doing any real big negotiations
Yeah,
around
it's
the
it's
rates
one of the most
like you
important
might do.
days in
Like
their
for
life,
example, for a
or like
Saturday.
the marriage. You're not
Yeah,
gonna like
yeah,
be nickeling and diming
yeah.
on that.
Yeah, or you're doing a 20-person dinner party for your top
Mhm,
executives. Whether you save 100 or 500, you don't care. Like, it's already a
mhm,
budgeted in there, and they might be spending $10,000 on the dinner, and so the location might be
mhm,
5,000 of it, you know? And so that's kind of the clientele I worked with in my catering event management company, and so I just have a comfort working in that space, and I will say my experience does help because inevitably
mhm,
something will come up with the setup or during the event or, that if I didn't have any knowledge base on navigating that, it would
mhm,
be hard. Like, I can see if a caterer is running behind. Like if we have a home where the caterers come in and they're prepping their food and they're getting ready, I know whether they're gonna hit you need to be ready 30 minutes before the guests arrive or more, and I can tell
Hmm.
when they're gonna miss the mark, and so I can help them, get
Hmm.
back on track. If I didn't have the experience I have, I wouldn't see that, and then the guests would just roll up, and inevitably, their event wouldn't be as spectacular as planned, and if Lodgewell was the one that said, "We can manage your event," or "We can support you in this," then we're
Hmm.
the ones that get blamed. So I have, you know, like, events just aren't good at blah, blah, blah location, and I don't get to go, "Oh, but the caterer messed up, not me," you
Hmm.
know?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, that's interesting, and it gives people some ideas of what else could be done as well. But recognizing that it's extra work, as you said, and it's not just free money for sure. Nothing is.
No. None of this is very like, even when you think about, like, the Airbnb space, and I watch these people on Instagram, and they're like, "I work 3 hours and I make $3,000,000, or whatever they say. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
"It is
yeah.
not that." Like, this is very active work,
Hmm.
like, caring for people and places. It's a
24/7.
lot.
You have the owners, you have the guests, you have the OTAs, you have the tools, the vendors. Yeah, a lot of moving pieces. But
Yep,
hey, we have fun, no, don't we? All right, all right. Well, Shireen,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would get out. If it ever stops being fun, I'll exit, but
of
right now,
course.
it's
Plus,
really
with
exciting.
all of those
So,
pivots that you are going through, that's also super interesting. And thanks for sharing with us your thought process on all of it, Shireen. This has been great. I've really enjoyed having you on. I could keep you here for 2 more hours, and we could have 2 more hours worth of interesting discussions to have. But no, it's been great having you on. Thanks so much for taking the time, and I hope to see you again very soon.
we
All
will.
right.
Thank you so much.